In today's class, we're going to talk about server-side request forgery. A lot of people find these vulnerabilities confusing or hard to understand. So, to keep it simple, let's forget about the forgery part and let's just talk about server-side requests. Previously, we learned when you try to access a website, you basically communicate with a computer that has a certain program installed on it that we call a web server, and the web server can serve you files, images, and so on, and it can also interpret or execute server-side languages like PHP, Python, and so on. Now, a lot of web servers do much more than simply serve you files and execute code. A lot of the time, they actually communicate with other servers. For example, in here, we have an example of a web server that is communicating to another server in here that we're calling server 1. It's communicating to it by sending a request to this server's address, which is server1.com, or it could be the IP of this server. And then as a result, it's getting user information. Now, it's probably doing this because this is a protected server that contains private information, but we'll talk about that later. Right now, basically, what's happening is you as a user is using a web server. The web server can serve you files, images, and execute server-side code, but to get the user information, it actually makes a request to another server in here and then serve you the user information. Now, again, in many cases, websites these days do so much more than that. So they might even have a shop. And to do that, they communicate with another server to get you products or to get you your Visa card information so you can pay, or to get you the stock of the amount of products that they have in their stock and so on. And to do that, it's making another request to another server in here, and it's communicating to it using its domain name. But like I said, it can also communicate to it using its address. I should also mention that these servers could exist on the cloud in a completely different location, or they might be connected to the same network as this computer in here. And as we know, a server is simply just a computer. So this right here could be just another computer with a certain application installed on it. Same goes to this and this device right here. So what we have right now is a client making a client request to the web server, and then the web server is making server requests to other servers. So this is an example of a server request, and this is an example of a client request. And if you remember previously, we actually covered SSRF vulnerabilities where we manipulate the client request and get the client to submit something that they don't want to do. And in server-side request forgery, we manipulate the server and make the server submit requests that it is not programmed to send, and as a result give us useful information as hackers or pen testers. So going back to this example right here, we have the client request in here to the web server, and then the server-side request in here going to another server. In a server-side request forgery scenario, as a hacker, you would send a forged request to the web server, and as a result, you could get the web server to go and submit requests to a completely different server. And as a result, if you are hacking this server or if you're submitting anything malicious to this server, when this server is analyzed, it'll seem like this server is the one that is trying to hack into it and not you. That's just one simple example. You can also submit requests to one of the servers that this server is usually communicate to. So if you remember, we said this server might be communicating with this server to get user information, as you can see in here. And this server is actually a protected server. So if you try to communicate with it directly, your requests will be denied because this server only communicates with this server because it probably has a whitelist or a blacklist. So it wouldn't communicate with you, but it would communicate with this web server because it trusts it. So, assuming this web server is vulnerable to a server-side request forgery, you would be able to send a forged request to this web server, and then instead of simply asking server1.com, you're gonna ask for /private, which in this scenario, for example, would get you private information about the user information that this server has, like their passwords or address or phone and so on. Now, this is only possible and this will only work because this server right here trusts the web server. So if you send that request directly from the client, it will be denied because this server does not know who you are and does not trust you. Another scenario of exploiting server-side request forgery, you can simply send a forged request to the server and cause it to send requests to itself. Again, probably bypassing security measurements and firewalls that this server has, because you're simply sending these requests from the server itself and overloading it by requests that are originating from the same server. You could even send forged requests to this web server to discover the internal network and possibly even discover the open ports or the running services on these ports. And then from there, discover vulnerabilities that these services might have and maybe even gain full control or code execution on the server or one of the clients that are connected to the same network. So the impact of server-side request forgery could be minor or very devastating, depending on the web application in here and what you can do with the exact vulnerability. So as we've seen, you can simply just send requests to other servers. You might be able to use it to access private data that is only available to the server, or you could get it to discover other clients in the same network. You could get it to discover other services running on these clients on the same network. And you can even gain a remote code execution from these vulnerabilities. And don't worry about all of that. We're going to spend a lot of time on these vulnerabilities. You'll understand the impact of them better, and you'll have a better understanding on how they work, how to discover them, and how to exploit them.